All right, so we're going to go over in the LRBT3 document, main conclusion question number 1. So, statistician, 2 major studies found no causal link between medical procedure X and disorder Y, but these studies are flawed. One study looked at 1,000 people who had undergone procedure X, and the other study looked at 1,100 people who had undergone procedure X. But because disorder Y occurs in only 0.02% of the population, researchers would need to include many more than 1,100 people in a study to detect even a doubling of the rate of disorder Y. Okay, so what exactly is this stimulus saying? So it's saying that two major studies, so they found no causal link between medical procedure X and disorder Y. But saying these studies are flawed. And that's because one study looked at 1,000 people and the other study looked at 1,100 people who had undergone the same procedure. But because the disorder Y occurs in only 0.02% of the population, researchers, they would need to include more than 1,100 people in a study. Okay, so what is the main conclusion? If you want to pause just for a second and see if you can identify the main conclusion in the stimulus, you can pause that right now, but the first sentence is the main conclusion. The fact that the 2 major studies that found no causal link, that those are flawed. So which one of these answer choices would most closely represent that first sentence? So let's start with A. Contrary to the findings of 2 major studies, there is reason to think that procedure X causes disorder Y. Is that what the first sentence is saying? No, not really. I wouldn't say so. B. 2 studies that discovered no causal link between procedure X and disorder Y are unsound. That sounds pretty good to me. Let me keep that for a second. C. Researchers should conduct more extensive studies of procedure X to determine whether the procedure is causally linked with disorder Y. Maybe that's what is saying over here, but that is not the main conclusion, so we can cross that out. The 2 studies cited did not reach a conclusion as to whether disorder Y results from procedure X. So maybe that's true, or the 2 studies didn't reach a... But still, we said the first sentence was the main conclusion. That's not what we said was the main conclusion. That's not really echoing that. Despite the opinions of many medical experts, it has not been established that there is a causal link between procedure X and procedure Y. We're not really talking about opinions of medical experts. That hasn't really been stated or brought up. That's bringing new information. And because this is a top-down question, we are not bringing in any sort of new information, or even if it did have to do with medical experts, that's not what our first sentence, which is the main conclusion, is saying. And B is the answer because it most closely reflects what the first sentence is saying, is that, like what we predicted, there's no causal link, that the major studies found that there were no causal link between medical procedure X and disorder Y, but these studies are flawed. So B is saying that the 2 studies that discovered no causal link between those 2 are unsound or flawed.